Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 16005 in the name of Christine Graham on the Lockerbie bombing, a father's search for justice. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate. Please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Christine Graham to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I thank members who signed the motion to allow the debate to take place, as it's quite controversial. I have been campaigning on the Lockerbie bombing and whether the conviction of Abdelbaset al-Megrahi was safe for decades, but not as long as Dr Jim Swire. His daughter Flora, on her way to meet her American boyfriend, was murdered on 21st December 1988, when Pan Am Flight 103 blew up over Lockerbie, killing all 243 passengers, 16 crew and 11 Lockerbie residents, 270 folk in all. 190 were American citizens and 43 were British, all individuals with their lives ahead. 19 other nationalities were represented, including a group of US intelligence specialists. Because of time pressure, this is a potted history. The suspicion initially fell on Iran. 5 months before Lockerbie, an American warship, the SS Vincennes, shot down an Iranian passenger airliner over the Persian Gulf after mistaking it for a fighter jet. 290 men, women and children on board were killed. Iran swore revenge. In October that year, West German police raided flats in Frankfurt, where members of the PFLP-GC were preparing bombs in radio cassettes players. They had timetables for airlines, including Pan Am. Less than 2 months later, Pan Am 103 was brought down. 3 years later, in 1999, after a joint investigation by Dumfries Galloway Constabulary and the FBI, for some of us out of the blue, arrest warrants were issued for 2 Libyans. This was after negotiations and United Nations sanctions against Libya being lifted, when Gaddafi handed over 2 men for trial at a special court at Camp Zeiss in the Netherlands under Scots law before 3 judges. One of the accused, Fima, was found to be not proven, Megrahi guilty. Now to the significant role of the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, the SCCRC. Megrahi lost his first appeal against his conviction in 2002, but won a second right to appeal after a 4-year investigation and referral by the independent SCCRC. It found there was no proper basis in allegations that investigators had manipulated, altered or fabricated evidence to make a case against Megrahi. But it did conclude the court had no reasonable basis for finding that Megrahi bought the clothes in Malta, undermining a cornerstone of the prosecution case. The Commission said the verdict had been, in quotes, unreasonable, close quotes, and that Megrahi might have suffered a miscarriage of justice. Terminally ill, he was freed on compassionate grounds by the Scottish Government in 2009, abandoning that second appeal, and died 3 years later in Tripoli. In 2020, after requests from Megrahi's family, the SCCRC referred the case back to the appeal court again. The Commission said the trial court should not have accepted that Megrahi bought the clothes that were beside the bomb. It also said he was denied a fair trial because of non-disclosure, as the prosecution didn't give the defence certain information which could have helped him. 5 of Scotland's most senior judges, however, upheld the conviction, saying the identification of Megrahi was just one part of the overall picture and the information which was not disclosed to defence would not have changed the verdict. Now, there are many aspects of evidence which led to that conviction which give me cause for concern, but in time allocated, I would recommend that members read for themselves writings on both sides of the arguments for and against this conviction and make up their own mind. To give you some context, the wreckage of the crash was scattered over 770 square miles, and in total 4 million pieces of wreckage were collected and registered in computer files. So that gives you an idea of the size of the crime scene. A key piece of evidence was from recovered fragments of a Samsonite suitcase believed to have contained the bomb, together with parts of a circuit board, identified as components of a Toshiba Bombbeat RT SF-16 radio cassette, similar to that used to conceal a Semtex bomb seized by West German police from the Palestinian militant group PFLP-GC 2 months earlier. There were also items of clothing which were subsequently proven to have been made in Malta, thought to have come from the same suitcase. These clothes were traced to a Maltese merchant, Tony Gauci, who became a key prosecution witness, testifying that he sold them to a man of Libyan appearance. Now, Gauci was interviewed 23 times, giving contradictory evidence about who had bought the clothes, that person's age and appearance, and the date of purchase, but later identified Abdelbaset Al-Megrahi. Now, I'll restrict my comments to the evidence of the Maltese shopkeeper Tony Gauci, whose identification of Megrahi as the man who bought the suitcase containing the clothes which hid the bomb timer was key to his conviction. Incidentally, Gauci reportedly also was in receipt of $2 million, but he described Megrahi as 50-year-old, over 6 feet tall, dark-skinned, heavily built customer. But Megrahi was at the time 36, 5 feet 8, light-skinned and slightly built. Indeed, 5 years after the trial, former Lord Advocate Lord Fraser of Carmiley publicly described Gauci as being, quotes, an apple short of a picnic, close quotes, and, quotes, not quite the full shilling, close quotes. So much more can be said, but at the very least, doubts over that identification should be enough for a public inquiry into all the circumstances surrounding events, from the date the Iranian passenger plane being shot out of the sky by an American warship while that passenger plane was flying over Iranian airspace to date. Subsequent UK governments have prevented the publication of documents said to have indicated that Palestinian militants were involved in bombing Pan Am 103. Indeed, in 2020, the then Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab imposed public interest immunity certificates on the documents, so no one has access to them. At the very least, these should be released. Finally, though decades have passed, my condolences to all affected by this cruel terrorist act, and my thanks to the people of Lockerbie, who at the time provided what comfort they could to distraught friends and relatives, even washing the clothes of the deceased once they were no longer needed for forensic evidence, and they commemorate those losses to this day. I take no pleasure, Deputy Presiding Officer, in reminding them all of this horrific day, but until there is full disclosure, and then these serious, unsettling questions about who committed this heinous crime and why it was committed will continue, and certainly by me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call Emma Harper to be followed by Colin Smith. Ms Harper.
Presiding Officer, I congratulate Christine Graham on securing this debate. I know she's been an advocate on matters relating to the Lockerbie air disaster for many years, and she's laid out the history very well in the short time that she has. And I thank her for her work and her support for Jim Swire and other families in their search for truth and justice relating to the Lockerbie bombing, and truth and justice for the murder of his daughter Flora. This is the worst terrorist bombing in the UK. Lockerbie is, of course, part of my South Scotland region. I spent my teenage years growing up 8 miles from the town. I know the strong emotions still felt locally and the huge impact the bombing had on Lockerbie and the wider area. There are many parts of the motion, Presiding Officer, this evening that I agree with, including paying tribute to the families of Justice for Lockerbie. On the night of the bombing, I was working in the operating theatre at DGRI. When I first heard the news, the report said a military plane had crashed over the border here in Scotland. My dad called my sister, and we were flatmates at the time, and he said that he had been out checking the dairy cows in the maternity paddock as they were about to calve, and he was just going about his routine dairyman duties. He said he heard a boom in the sky, in the night sky overhead, just after 7 p.m. Maybe it's an explosion, he said. So we turned on the news. After he phoned us, there would be news for many months, Presiding Officer. And these are some of my memories. We were summoned to the hospital, where we both worked, and under the professional, calm, efficient, effective instruction from the senior charge nurse in theatre and the theatre team were told to initially anticipate mass casualties, and we prepared for that. We prepped Theatre 1 and Theatre 2, major trauma, Theatre 3, orthopaedic trauma, Theatre 4, minor injuries. We primed IV fluids, set up trolleys for general anaesthesia and intubation, for arterial lines and for central venous access line placement. At 10 p.m, the theatre staff were crowded in the coffee room, glued to the news as the facts were beginning to unfold. There would be no casualties coming to theatre. This was not a military plane crash. It was Pan Am Flight 103, with 259 humans on board, exploded at 7:02 p.m, 4 days before Christmas. And later we found out 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie were killed. That night will always stick with me, Presiding Officer. And I pay tribute to the people of Lockerbie and Syracuse, including Lockerbie Academy and Syracuse University, for everything they do to keep the memory of the victims of the Lockerbie bombing alive. I attended the 35th anniversary of the Lockerbie bombing at Lockerbie Academy with the launch of a photographic exhibition of the people of Lockerbie going about their normal lives, rebuilding. Presiding Officer, for many families, the search for justice does continue. The upcoming US court case, the trial of a Libyan man, is scheduled for May this year in Washington, DC. And a section of the fuselage from Pan Am Flight 103 was transported to the USA as evidence. And I understand that US prosecutors will use evidence from the first trial and new information obtained since then. And while the man charged has denied building the bomb, I think it is important that the Lockerbie Victims Access Act directs the court to make reasonable efforts to provide video and telephone access to the case for people affected by the bombing. And I also agree with the First Minister in his response to Christine Graham at FMQs last week. I think it's right to allow the US trial to progress and therefore not make any comment which could prejudice proceedings. And in closing, Presiding Officer, I want to acknowledge the work of the emergency services at the scene during that time. I'm sure it was traumatic. And I want to record my respect for the resilience of the families for justice for Lockerbie and for the people of the town for keeping the memory of the victims alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. And I now call Colin Smith. Mr Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 21st of December, I attended the Service of Remembrance and Gratitude at Tundergarth Church, organised by Tundergarth Kirks Trust and the Pan Am 103 Lockerbie Legacy Foundation. Members of families who lost loved ones, students from Lockerbie Academy, members of the community quietly, poignantly read out the names of each of the 270 souls lost, accompanied by pictures of each victim in happy times: wives, husbands, mums, dads, 14 children and babies, some as young as 2 months old, murdered in the atrocity that was the bombing of Pan Am 103. 259 of those victims from 21 nations were on the flight, including 16 crew members and 35 students from Syracuse University in New York. And 11 victims, some as young as 10 years old, were in Lockerbie as the wreckage showered down on their town. Presiding Officer, when we discuss in this place what remains the worst terrorist atrocity our nation has ever seen, always we should remember first and foremost that this is about 270 innocent people who needlessly lost their lives. That service at Tundergarth also recognised the truly humbling response of the community and emergency services to that tragedy at the time and ever since. The decent, ordinary people we don't hear much about anymore. The couple who found the body of a young man in their field and didn't want to leave him, so stood vigil overnight. The man who scooped up the body of a toddler and took them into the town to avoid them being left in the dark and the wet. The women of Lockerbie who in the aftermath washed, ironed and carefully packed the clothes and belongings of victims back into the suitcases that had been strewn across the fields so they could be returned to their loved ones. Presiding Officer, I could say so much more about the remarkable people at the sharp end of the response to the Lockerbie bombing, from the community and emergency services, many of whom worked tirelessly for days on end trying to cope and to help others to cope with the magnitude of the destruction at the time. Many continue to do so to this day as families of those victims continue to visit the last resting place of their loved ones, and they take comfort from the Memorial Garden and Lodge in Drysdale Cemetery, the Remembrance Room at Tundergarth Church, the peaceful memorials in Sherwood Crescent and Rosebank Crescent, the glass window in the Town Hall which depicts the flags of the 21 countries who lost citizens in the bombing. But most importantly, families take comfort from the warmth of a community that has supported them since in the past 36 years. Because it isn't just about physical memorials. Lasting friendships have been formed between families of those lost, and the community and bonds have been formed between Lockerbie Academy and Syracuse University. And each time the spotlight has been shown on Lockerbie, whether it's because of news coverage of trials, conspiracy theories, TV dramas, the dignified humanity of the people of Lockerbie has shone back. And what always strikes me most from speaking to families from across the world who come to Lockerbie is not only a gratitude for the way the community opened their hearts and their homes to families, but a realisation that Lockerbie isn't just where those horrific events of the 21st of December 1988 cruelly happened. Presiding Officer, I make this point because although it is so important to reflect, to remember the tragic loss of the Maid of the Seas over Lockerbie, which will of course always be part of the town's stories, we should also reflect that there is much more to the town of Lockerbie, a vibrant, proud and a forward-looking community.
Thank you. And I now call on Minister Siobhan Brown to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Christine Graham for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I know that the member has spoken over many years on this issue associated with the Lockerbie disaster with passion and with dedication, and I know Christine Graham will continue to pursue this. But this may be one of the final occasions that Christine brings Lockerbie to be discussed in Parliament as she stands down next year, and Parliament will be poorer as a result. Can I also thank Emma Harper and Colin Smith for their powerful personal contributions this evening as well. Presiding Officer, I begin by offering my continuing sympathy to all of those that lost loved ones on that awful night all those years ago on Pan Am Flight 103 and in the town of Lockerbie. We should also remember the emergency workers from around the town and further afield who responded in the immediate aftermath of this atrocity. Their rapid response, along with the people of Lockerbie under extraordinary circumstances, demonstrated remarkable professionalism, kindness and humanity in the face of one of the worst terrorist attacks on Scottish soil. While the events of the 21st of December 1988 have had a lasting impact on the town, I know links were forged following the disaster between Lockerbie and other communities affected by the disasters, such as a Syracuse University Scholarship Programme with the Lockerbie Academy. Presiding Officer, Ms Graham's motion highlights Dr Jim Swire, who lost his daughter Flora in the disaster. Dr Swire's steadfast commitment to his cause in memory of his daughter is a testimony to the endurance of the human spirit. And I am sure that members will understand that it would be inappropriate for me as a Scottish minister to make any comment on the criminal cases that followed the disaster. However, the motion makes reference to concerns expressed by Dr Swire and others about the criminal justice process. It is important to confirm to Parliament the checks and balances that exist within the Scottish justice system. Presiding Officer, the processes of investigating and determining alleged miscarriages of justice operate independently of Scottish ministers. As the motion notes, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission are an independent public body with responsibility for investigating cases where it is alleged that a miscarriage of justice may have occurred, either in relation to a conviction or the sentence. The Commission have extensive powers to obtain documents from any person or organisation and to request that evidence be given under oath. Under the statutory test set by Parliament, the Commission will refer a person's conviction to the Appeal Court for a fresh appeal if, after considering the application, they think that a miscarriage of justice may have occurred. And if you just give me one moment, please, and that is in the interest of justice for the case to be referred back to the Appeal Court. Where a case is referred back to the Appeal Court for a fresh appeal, it will then be for the Appeal Court to determine whether to quash or uphold the person's conviction or sentence. Presiding Officer, 3 appeals have been made on behalf of the late Mr McGahey. In 2002, the Scottish Appeal Court, sitting at Camps Zeist in the Netherlands, heard his first appeal and refused it. Thereafter, the Commission had referred the relevant conviction of Mr Mugahi to the appeal court twice, and each time appeals proceedings were heard. It might be helpful to put on the record that Mr Mugahi abandoned his second appeal in 2009, shortly before he was released on compassionate grounds. And as Christine Graham said, Mr Mugahi died in Libya in 2012. A second and posthumous application to the Commission was made by Mr Mugahi's family in 2017, and this resulted in his conviction being referred back to the Appeals Court in March 2020. The Appeal Court fully considered the case and published its judgment on that appeal, upholding Mr Mugahi's conviction in January 2021. An application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court was refused by that court in July 2022. While the Appeal Court has heard and rejected two full appeals against Mr Mugahi's conviction already, it does remain open to his family to submit a further application to the Commission. This would likely be on the basis that there be new evidence that has not been considered by the Appeal Court when it considered a previous appeal against conviction to support a claim that there had been a miscarriage of justice. This is an essential element of how the Scottish justice system operates and is available to anyone who has unsuccessfully appealed their conviction to the High Court. I hope that this information has set out reassurances to members that there are processes in place to allow any alleged miscarriage of justice to be fully investigated, and that these have been utilised in this case. Presiding Officer, I want to finish by commending the people of Lockerbie and those affected by the tragedy. The town itself will unfortunately always be known for what happened over 36 years ago. But the people in the town have shown a determination in their own individual ways to look to the future while acknowledging and reflecting on the past. That is through the connections made with families and affected by the loss of life in America, and through local community groups within the Lockerbie area. Sherwood Crescent in Lockerbie was devastated by the disaster, and one of the residents said at the time, "They were here 1 minute, then they were gone." Presiding Officer, these victims in the town of Lockerbie are not forgotten. They are remembered through the actions of those in the town who lived through this horrendous act of terrorism, and those of future generations. We also remember Flora and the other victims on board Pan Am Flight 103 through the enduring human spirit of people like Dr. Swire and many others who ensure we do not forget the horrific events of that fateful night. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting.